They say you die twice. Once when your heart stops, and again the last time someone says your name. But they're wrong. You can die 1,000 small deaths every day in the same house until you're nothing but a ghost that does laundry. My story, the one that matters, begins with my 1,001st death, the one that finally woke me up. If you've ever felt invisible, ever been dismissed, ever been told you're nothing more than a burden, then you need to hear this. This is how I took back my name. Follow my story, share it with anyone who needs to hear it, and hit that notification bell, because the truth is about to burn their world to the ground. My name is Freya. I am 72 years old, and my story begins on the night I was publicly executed with a single, perfectly crafted sentence. The executioner was my daughter-in-law, Amelia. The venue was the annual gala for Innovate Genetics, my son Liam's company, a name that tasted like ash in my mouth. It was held in a glittering ballroom at the Rosewood Sandhill Hotel in Menlo Park, a place where the air itself seemed to hum with the self-congratulatory buzz of new money and world-changing ambition. The chandeliers dripped light like liquid diamonds onto a sea of tailored suits and designer dresses. The clinking of glasses and the low thrum of conversation felt like a physical pressure against my skin. I stood by a service door, a ghost in a simple black dress I'd owned for 20 years, trying to merge with the shadows. My job tonight was to be a silent sentinel, to watch for any potential need, a human backup system in case the impeccably trained staff somehow failed. Amelia was the center of it all, a supernova in a silver dress that shimmered and clung to her like a second skin. It probably cost more than my entire year's Social Security checks. She held a champagne flute with practiced elegance, her laughter a series of tiny, sharp bells that cut through the noise. I watched her, not with resentment, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a particularly venomous specimen. A man, his face smooth with the kind of confidence that only comes from a 9-figure net worth, gestured his head in my direction. He leaned in towards Amelia, his voice a conspiratorial murmur I could read on his lips, even from across the room. "Who is that?" Amelia's eyes flicked towards me for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition, just categorization. A slight, theatrical smile played on her lips. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, letting the man wait, building the moment. "Oh, that?" she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the half-dozen people in her orbit. She gestured with her flute, a casual, dismissive flick of the wrist. "That's just Freya, my husband's mother." She paused, letting the information land before delivering the killing blow. "Our live-in Leech maid." A wave of polite, appreciative chuckles rippled through her circle. Not loud, just a soft, cruel punctuation mark. They looked at me, their eyes gliding over me with a newfound understanding. I was no longer an anonymous old woman. I was a defined object, a punchline, a leech, a maid. The words didn't sting. There was no fresh wound. It was more like a scalpel, wielded by a surgeon with a steady hand, cutting through layers of scar tissue to confirm a diagnosis I had made for myself years ago. The blade was clean, precise, and cold. In their world of obscene wealth and genetic self-improvement, I was an anomaly, a genetic dead end, a withered dependent, a relic from a bygone era, leeching off the vibrant success of their Silicon Valley empire. They saw a quiet, gray woman who washed their clothes and cooked their food. They had no idea they were the parasites. They were feasting on a host whose true nature, whose very DNA, was the bedrock of their entire glittering world. They had no idea that the foundation they stood upon was about to crumble into dust. That night, back in the sprawling, sterile house, I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I had discarded decades ago. Crying was an emotional expenditure, and my energy was now a finite, precious resource to be allocated with strategic precision. I walked past the grand floating staircase and the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a perfectly manicured, soulless garden. I went to my small gray room at the back of the house, the one next to the laundry room, and I locked the door. The click of the lock was the sound of a starting gun. In the crushing silence, I stood before the mirror and looked at the woman staring back. I saw the lines on her face, not as wrinkles, but as a map of her endurance. I saw the quiet in her eyes not as resignation, but as a banked fire. They had given me a name, Leech made, a name meant to break me. Instead, it became my armor. I decided, with a clarity that felt like ice water flooding my veins, that it was time to burn their world to the ground. Our house, their house, on Edgewood Drive in Palo Alto, wasn't a home. It was a showroom, a testament to Liam and Amelia's taste, which was really just a reflection of the latest issue of Architectural Digest. It was a cold cathedral of minimalism. White walls, polished concrete floors, and furniture so angular and uncomfortable it seemed to punish you for sitting on it. Everything was controlled by a smart system, a disembodied voice named Aura that managed the lights, the temperature, the security. Amelia loved showing it off to guests, making Aura play a specific jazz playlist or dim the lights to evening mode. For me, Aura was just another warden. The system always seemed to set the thermostat in my room to a clinical chill, a few degrees colder than the rest of the house, a subtle, constant reminder of my place. It was a house designed to be photographed, not lived in. There were no family pictures on the walls, no scuff marks on the baseboards, no comfortable clutter. It was as sterile as an operating theater. My days were a silent, relentless routine of chores they wouldn't trust to a stranger, because a stranger might talk. I hand-washed Amelia's delicate silk blouses and cashmere sweaters, the ones that cost hundreds of dollars and couldn't be trusted to a machine. The scent of the expensive, chemical-free detergent clung to my hands. I prepared Liam's macrobiotic meals, weighing kale and quinoa to the gram, arranging them in bento boxes with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. He was convinced this diet was the key to optimizing his cognitive function. I tended the sterile orchid garden in the atrium, a collection of exotic, temperamental flowers that, like everything else in the house, required constant, meticulous care, but offered no warmth in return. They were beautiful, but they had no scent. Liam would pass me in the hall, a blur of motion, on his way to his home office or the garage. "Hey, Mom," he'd mutter, his eyes already locked on his phone, his thumb flicking through market reports or urgent emails. He saw me, but he didn't see me. I was a familiar shape in his peripheral vision, a part of the house's infrastructure. The one time I tried to stop him, to tell him about a strange noise the dishwasher was making, he held up a hand. "Can't, Mom. On a call with the board in 5. Just text me the details." He'd forgotten that I didn't have a smartphone. I had a simple flip phone for emergencies, a relic he and Amelia found amusing. He was a good son, I used to tell myself. He provided for me. But he provided a cage, not a home. He was so blinded by the pursuit of his father's legacy, a legacy he fundamentally misunderstood, that he couldn't see the woman who had given him life. He was a part of the disease, a carrier of his father's cold ambition. Amelia's cruelty was more intricate. She never raised her voice at me. Instead, she wielded a patronizing sweetness that was 1,000 times more insulting than her open contempt at the party. She would leave little sticky notes for me. "Freya, darling, the hydrangeas are looking a bit sad. Could you give them some love?" The smiley face was the twist of the knife. One afternoon, her friend, a woman with a face stretched tight from cosmetic procedures, was visiting. As I served them their iced green tea, Amelia placed a hand on my arm. "Freya is just a lifesaver," she said to her friend, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I don't know what we'd do without her. It's so wonderful she has things to do to keep her busy, to give her a sense of purpose, you know?" She was framing my unpaid labor as a form of therapy for a lonely old woman. I smiled, a tight, meaningless stretch of my lips, and retreated to the kitchen, the sound of their vapid conversation about a new yoga retreat in Tulum fading behind me. Her need for status was a bottomless pit, and she filled it by standing on my back. Only my grandson, Leo, saw a person. Leo was 17, a lanky, brilliant kid who seemed to live inside his laptop and a pair of oversized headphones. He was a tangle of limbs and quiet anxiety, navigating the treacherous landscape of adolescence under the immense pressure of his parents' expectations. He was supposed to be the heir, the next generation of genetic genius, but sometimes he would escape. He'd find me in the kitchen, the only room in the house that had any semblance of warmth. He wouldn't say much at first, just pull up a stool and watch me knead dough or chop vegetables. Then he'd pull out his phone. "Grandma, you gotta see this," he'd whisper, showing me a viral TikTok of a dog playing a tiny piano or a ridiculous dance craze. He'd complain about his advanced coding classes, about the pressure to get into Stanford, about how his dad only ever talked to him about his future IPO potential. "He doesn't ask if I'm happy," Leo confessed one evening, his voice quiet. "He just asks if my projects are on track to be monetizable." In those moments, I saw the cracks in their perfect family. He saw a person, an ally. He saw his grandmother. To Liam and Amelia, I was just part of the architecture, a ghost that did laundry and prepared meals. They were so comfortable in their ignorance, so secure in their gilded cage. Comfort, I thought as I wiped down the cold, marble countertop, would be the first casualty of my war. Every condescending smile from Amelia, every distracted, "Hey, Mom," from Liam was no longer an injury. It was ammunition. The night of the gala, after the Leech made performance, the charade was over. I locked the door to my room, and the quiet click of the deadbolt felt like the arming of a missile. The rage I'd suppressed for decades was no longer a hot, consuming fire. It had cooled, compressed itself into a solid, heavy thing in my chest. A diamond of pure, cold fury. For years I had been passive, a victim of circumstance, a prisoner of my own history. I had let them define me. First Richard, with his clinical cruelty, and now his son and his vapid wife, with their casual disdain. No more. I knelt on the cold gray carpet, the fibers rough against my old knees. My hands were steady as I reached under the simple metal frame of my bed. My fingers found the almost invisible seam in the floorboards. I worked a small, flat knife into the crack and pried. The board came up with a soft groan of protest. There, in the dark space below, was not a shoebox of old letters or faded photographs. It was a Pelican case, a hard, black, waterproof container designed to protect sensitive equipment. It was heavy, the weight of 30 years of secrets. I lifted it out and placed it on my bed. The latches opened with 2 sharp, satisfying snaps. I opened the lid. Nestled in the custom-cut gray foam was not a gun or a bundle of cash. It was a small, obsidian black slate, about the size of a paperback book. It was cool and smooth to the touch, utterly featureless, except for a single, thumb-sized circular depression in its center. A custom-made biometric scanner. A ghost from a past I had tried to bury. A memory, sharp and vivid as a shard of glass, surfaced unbidden. I was 30 years younger, in Richard's private lab. Not the shiny corporate labs of Innovate Genetics, but his original sanctuary of steel and glass hidden in the basement of our old house. The air smelled of ozone and antiseptic. He was holding a prototype of the device in my hands now. His grip on my wrist was firm, impersonal. He pressed my thumb down onto the scanner. His face was illuminated by the glow of a monitor, displaying complex lines of code, his expression one of intense, focused satisfaction. "This," he had whispered, his voice devoid of all warmth, a dry rustle of sound. "This is the key to your legacy, Freya. Your only purpose." He wasn't talking about our son, about our family. He was talking about my genetic code, the unique sequences he had discovered in my blood, the ones he believed set our family line apart, the ones he was obsessed with isolating and replicating. For 3 decades, I had been a prisoner of that legacy. He had made me his primary research subject, his specimen zero. He documented, analyzed, and experimented on me with the dispassionate rigor of a botanist studying a rare plant. He forced me to learn his systems, to understand his research, not as a collaborator, but as a zookeeper needs to understand the animal in the cage. He believed my understanding of the work was essential to my compliance. It was his greatest mistake. I was his secret, a living database of his unethical work. Now, his secret would become my weapon. I looked down at my thumb. The skin was thin, the whorls of my fingerprint softened by age, but the scanner wouldn't care. It read deeper than the surface. It read the unique biological signature he had been so obsessed with. My hand trembled just for a second. This was it. The point of no return. A lifetime of quiet endurance had led to this single moment of rebellion. The faces of Liam and Amelia flashed in my mind, his dismissal, her smirk. The sound of that polite, cruel laughter. I thought of Leo, and a pang of something sharp, like guilt, pierced through the cold rage. But this wasn't just about them anymore. This was about me. This was about the woman in the lab, the woman whose body was treated like a patent application. This was about reclaiming the very code of my being. With a deep, steadying breath, I pressed my thumb firmly into the depression. For a long second, nothing happened. The black slate remained inert, a dead thing, a flicker of panic. Had it degraded? Had the power source died after all these years? And then, a tiny green light blinked to life in the corner of the device. It was a quiet, unassuming signal. But to me, it was a supernova, a secure offline network, a digital kingdom built on my stolen biology, recognized its one and only queen. The screen flickered, not with a graphical interface, but with a simple, blinking cursor against a black background. A command prompt. Richard's digital ghost was waiting. He had given me the key to my cage, believing it was the key to his legacy. He was right. It was a legacy of ruin. The game had begun. The past isn't a place you visit. It's a country that lives inside you, with its own climate, its own unforgiving terrain. For me, that country was a cold, sterile basement. The press of the biometric scanner under my thumb didn't just unlock a network. It unlocked the door to that country, and the ghosts came flooding out. They weren't misty apparitions. They were phantom sensations, data points etched into my very nerve endings. My body remembered even when my mind tried to forget. It started with a smell. Not the damp, earthy scent of a normal basement, but the sharp, sterile tang of antiseptic, so potent it felt like it was scouring my lungs from the inside. It was the smell of Richard's private world. Our home on Edgewood Drive had a cellar, yes, but it wasn't for wine or Christmas decorations. It was his laboratory, my prison, my proving ground. The memories surged. I was back in the chair, not an armchair, not a dining chair, a medical chair. Cold, unforgiving steel against my spine, the faux leather sticking to my skin, even in the chill. My arms would be strapped down, not cruelly, but firmly. For precision, my dear, Richard would murmur, his voice a low, calm hum that was more terrifying than any shout. We can't have any variables contaminating the results. I was the primary variable, the one he sought to control. The sting of a needle, that memory was the sharpest. It wasn't one sting, but 1,000, a constellation of tiny pains that mapped my arms, my thighs, the soft skin of my neck. He was always drawing blood. Monday for baseline readings. Wednesday to monitor the effects of the supplements. Friday to chart cellular decay and regeneration. He'd hold the vial up to the fluorescent light, a dark ruby jewel, and his eyes would gleam with a passion he never showed me, the woman, but me, the specimen. I held his complete, undivided attention. The supplements. They came in a little paper cup, always with a glass of water. Chalky pills, some with a bitter, metallic aftertaste that coated my tongue for hours. For your vitality, Freya, he'd say, watching me until I'd swallowed every last one. We're building a better you, a stronger lineage. He wasn't healing me. He wasn't nurturing me. He was mapping me, deconstructing me to my very essence to find what he was looking for. He was obsessed, a zealot in a lab coat. He spoke of our family's genetics with a kind of religious fervor, as if we were a chosen people. He believed we carried a sequence, a rare and powerful code that set us apart, a key to what he called controlled evolution, a way to edit out weakness, to engineer strength, to create a dynasty of perfect beings. It was the logic of monsters, whispered in the language of science. Eugenics, a word so ugly it felt like a disease on the tongue. But to him, it was a gospel. And I was his Eve, the source material for his Genesis. The worst part was his documentation. He was meticulous. Every blood draw, every pill, every fluctuation in my weight or mood was recorded in leather-bound journals and then digitized into his secure network. He wrote with a cold, clinical detachment that filleted me more brutally than any scalpel. I wasn't Freya. I was specimen 0. My pain was noted as subject exhibited signs of discomfort. My tears were increased lacrimal secretions. My pleas to stop were vocalized resistance. He rendered my suffering irrelevant, reducing my entire being to a series of data points. He was building an empire, a biotech titan built on a foundation of my stolen biology, my silent screams. My body was the cornerstone, and he was sealing me into the walls, one observation at a time. This legacy he was building, the one he would pass down to our son, it was all mine, my blood, my cells, my pain. And he never once thought the specimen would remember. He never once thought the cornerstone could bring the whole damn building down. The dawn that followed that night of memory felt different. The pale light filtering through the minimalist windows of Liam's house didn't feel like a new day, but like the single, sterile fluorescent bulb in the basement lab, illuminating a path I now had to walk. I dressed quietly, in old clothes that made me invisible, the uniform I had worn for years. But today, the invisibility was a cloak, a weapon. I slipped out of the house before anyone else was awake, the quiet click of the door behind me a period on the end of a long, miserable chapter. I walked to the station, my joints aching, and boarded the first Caltrain to San Francisco. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the track was a metronome counting down to a future I was now in control of. The city rose up to meet me, a forest of glass and steel, a world away from the silent, manicured prison of Edgewood Drive. I didn't go to a library or an office. I went to a place of perfect, transient anonymity. A Starbucks near the ferry building, teeming with tourists, students, and brokers, all lost in their own worlds, their faces illuminated by the glow of their devices. I was just another old woman with a cup of coffee. No one saw me. No one cared. It was perfect. I found a small table in the corner, the scent of burnt coffee and steamed milk thick in the air. From my worn handbag, I took out a burner phone I'd bought for cash at a corner store weeks ago, an act of foresight that now felt like a prophecy fulfilled. I connected to the public Wi-Fi, a thread in a web of a million other users, a ghost in the machine. Then, with a hand that was surprisingly steady, I navigated to the encrypted portal. I typed in the address from memory, a string of characters Richard had forced me to memorize, drilling me on it until it was branded onto my mind. He called it a security protocol. He wanted me to be his secretary for his dark work, his living, breathing ledger. He never imagined that his specimen had perfect, eidetic recall. He never imagined that in teaching me to be his tool, he was also teaching me how to dismantle his engine. The login screen appeared. It asked for a username and a biometric key. I pressed my thumb to the screen of the burner phone, which I'd linked to the scanner at home through a low-energy Bluetooth connection I had set up myself. For a moment, nothing. Then, a green check mark. Access granted. I was in. For years, his kingdom had lain dormant, a digital mausoleum holding the bones of his life's work. He had named it Project Chimera. A fitting name for a monster built from disparate stolen parts, my parts. Now I moved through its firewalls, its encrypted folders, and its password-protected directories like a phantom. The architecture he had thought impenetrable, I knew intimately. He had walked me through it himself, boasting of its complexity, never once seeing me as a person capable of understanding, only as an instrument to be trained. His arrogance was my key. I didn't rush. I moved slowly, methodically, reacquainting myself with the layout of his soul, and I found everything. Everything. The encrypted ledgers were the first prize. They detailed the money, the lifeblood of his project. I saw the donations, a clinical term for the bags of cash and untraceable wire transfers from other powerful families. I recognized the names, surnames that graced university buildings, philanthropic foundations, and political campaigns. The self-proclaimed titans of industry and society, all secretly buying into Richard's vision of a genetically purified world, a world where their children would be gods. They weren't just investors, they were co-conspirators. Then I found the patents, dozens of them. The core intellectual property of what was now Liam's company. Gene therapies for congenital diseases, regenerative formulas, cellular enhancement techniques, all of them revolutionary, all of them worth billions. And at the bottom of each technical document, in the fine print of the source data, was the designation of the original genetic material, Specimen 0. My stolen code, my DNA, twisted and repurposed into a commodity. They were selling my survival, my pain, my very being, back to the world as a luxury product. The rage was a cold, clean fire in my veins. A cruder person, a younger person, might have started deleting things, erasing the data, wiping the servers. But that would be a firework. A loud bang, a brief flash, and then darkness. The guilty would scatter, the evidence would be gone, and I would be a mad old woman with an unbelievable story. Deleting things was an act of passion. I was long past passion. This was an act of judgment. So I became a saboteur, a ghost rewiring the house from the inside. I didn't download a single file to my burner phone. That would leave a trace. Instead, using a series of commands I had learned by watching Richard, I began to plant logic bombs, tiny, elegant pieces of code, invisible to any security scan, designed to lie dormant. Some were simple. One was set to corrupt all financial records for the last fiscal quarter if a specific phrase was entered into the company's internal search engine. Another was designed to cross-reference the donor list with public tax records and leak any discrepancies to a series of investigative journalists, triggered only if the company's stock price hit a certain target. They were digital landmines, and I scattered them everywhere. Then I created the back doors, not for me, but for the world. I embedded code that, on my command, would mirror the entire archive, every last sick journal entry, every illegal donation, every patent built on my body, to public, open-source servers. The final, grand reveal. I wasn't just going to burn the library down. I was going to give every single book away for free. I sat there for 3 hours, in the noisy, anonymous warmth of the Starbucks. I drank a second coffee I didn't want. I watched the ferries glide across the bay, and with each line of code I wrote, with each trap I set, I felt a piece of myself being reclaimed. Richard had made me a specimen in a cage. He never realized that, over time, the specimen learns the shape of the lock. A few days later, the sun was warm on the back of my neck. I was in the garden, kneeling, pulling weeds from around Amelia's prize-winning roses. My hands were caked with rich, dark earth. It was real. It was tangible. It was a relief after spending so much time in the cold, unreal world of data and memory. I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I didn't have to look up to know it was Liam. He cleared his throat. I stayed where I was, my focus on a stubborn thistle. "Mom?" I tugged, and the weed came free, roots and all. I tossed it into the bucket beside me. "Liam, I wanted to talk about the other night," he began, his voice laced with the practiced sincerity of a CEO handling a difficult PR situation. "About what Amelia said." I finally looked up at him. "My son. He was handsome, in the way his father had been. Tall, well-dressed in a casual polo shirt that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension. But his eyes, they were weak. They couldn't meet mine for more than a second. He had the grace to look ashamed, but it was a shallow, fleeting shame, like a shadow passing over a polished surface. She was stressed, Mom. The gala, the launch. It's a lot of pressure. She didn't mean it. You know how she gets." He was making excuses for her, for the woman who had publicly flayed me, who had called me a parasite in my own son's home. He wasn't defending me. He was managing me. He held out a small, glossy envelope. We wanted to get you something. To make up for it." I took the envelope with my dirt-stained fingers. Inside was a gift card. A spa day for one at a hideously expensive resort in Napa Valley. Massages, facials, a mud bath. The gesture was so profoundly, so perfectly ignorant that a laugh almost escaped me. It was a laugh that would have sounded like shattering glass. They thought they could scrub away decades of neglect and a lifetime of pain with a day of pampering. They thought my dignity had a price, and that price was a hot stone massage and a glass of complimentary champagne. They didn't see a person. They saw a problem to be placated, an inconvenience to be managed. I tucked the card into my pocket without a word. My silence seemed to make him more uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, looking for a new topic, a safer one. His eyes lit up with the manufactured passion he reserved for his work. You know, the launch. It's going to be incredible, Mom. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, excited tone. This new therapy is a game changer. We're talking about reversing degenerative neurological disorders. It's revolutionary. He puffed out his chest, a proud air. This is Dad's legacy, Mom. Everything he worked for, everything he dreamed of. We're finally bringing it to the world. We're changing the world. His eyes were shining, a pure, undiluted, misguided pride. He said Dad's legacy with such reverence, as if he were talking about a saint. He had no idea what that legacy was built on. He had no idea that the revolutionary science was my plundered biology, that the foundation of his shining future was the dark, sterile hell of my past. He saw his father as a visionary, a brilliant pioneer. He couldn't see the monster. He couldn't see the zealot who strapped his own wife to a chair and bled her for data. I looked at my son, this handsome, successful man, and I saw nothing of the little boy I had once loved. I saw a stranger, blinded by ambition, numbed by wealth, a willing acolyte to his father's monstrous religion. He wasn't just a fool who had been deceived. He was a participant. He was a priest in the same cult, tending the same altar. He was not just adjacent to the sickness. He was a carrier. He was part of the disease. In that moment, standing in the sun-drenched garden, with the smell of roses in the air, any last, lingering ember of hope I had for him was extinguished. The faint, foolish wish that he could be saved, that he could be shown the truth and choose the right path, it vanished. It turned to ash and blew away on the breeze. He had made his choice long ago, when he chose the inheritance over the mother, the legacy over the truth. My resolve, which had been forged in the cold fire of memory, now hardened. It went from steel to diamond, unbreakable, unbending. I would not just expose them. I would shatter their world so completely that there would be nothing left to salvage, and I would spare no one, not the investors, not Amelia, and not the son who looked at me with his father's eyes and saw only a ghost. I got back to my feet, my knees cracking a little. I picked up the bucket of weeds. "The roses are looking beautiful, Liam," I said, my voice perfectly even. "Amelia will be pleased." My new life as a digital ghost was a quiet one, conducted in the dead of night from the small laptop I kept hidden in my room. It was a delicate, dangerous dance. I was a burglar in my own home, stealing back what was mine, one line of code at a time. The work was slow, meticulous. I was embedding my final logic bomb, the most vicious one yet, deep within their primary financial servers. This one was designed to trigger during the gala's live stream. It would reroute a fraction of a cent from every single share traded in the aftermath of the announcement, siphoning the panic selling into an anonymous, decentralized crypto wallet. A final insult, draining the blood from the vampire. As I was typing the final execution command, a new window suddenly popped up on the system's administrative dashboard, a part of the network I monitored constantly. It was a small, innocuous-looking alert, but the text on it made my blood run cold. Alert. Unauthorized entry detected on secure server. Port 443. Querying source IP. High priority flag. My heart didn't just hammer. It stopped. A flat line of pure, cold terror. For a long, silent second, I couldn't breathe. I was caught. After all this planning, all this care, they had found me. The alert specified that it was from a third-party cybersecurity firm. Of course, Liam, ever the diligent CEO, wouldn't rely on in-house security. He would have hired the best, a pack of digital bloodhounds. My hands flew to the keyboard to close the connection, to erase my tracks, but I stopped myself. It was too late for that. A panicked exit would be just as incriminating as the intrusion itself. It would be an admission of guilt. The bloodhounds would be on the scent, and they would tear the network apart until they found the source. They'd trace the intrusion back to an internal IP address, to this house, to my room. My mind raced, adrenaline sharpening my thoughts into a razor's edge. I had seconds, maybe a minute at most before they escalated it, before they locked me out and started a full diagnostic. I couldn't hide. I couldn't run. so I had to misdirect. I had to give the hunters a bigger, dumber, more obvious target to chase. I had to throw them a piece of bloody meat so they wouldn't notice the quiet wolf already inside the fences. My mind leaped to Amelia. Her vanity. Her obsession with her public image, her brand. It was her greatest weakness. And in that moment, it became my greatest strength. With my left hand, I kept the connection to the financial server open, letting them track my ghost signature. With my right, I used a separate, older backdoor Richard had built, a sort of master key he'd used to spy on his business partners, to slither into a different part of their digital lives. Amelia's personal cloud. It was pathetically easy. Her password was the name of her horse, followed by the year she won her first equestrian trophy. Inside was a shrine to her own ego. Thousands of photos, social media drafts, influencer collaboration contracts. I ignored it all. I went for her linked accounts, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I didn't try to be subtle. I did the opposite. I made it look like the world's clumsiest hacker was at work. From a terminal window, I used a simple script to reroute my connection through a public proxy server with an IP address in Russia. It was a cliché, but it was a cliché security analysts looked for. Then, I initiated a series of clumsy, rapid-fire password reset requests for her Instagram account, one after another. Ping, ping, ping. Her phone would be blowing up with notifications. Next, I launched a brute force attack, a simple dictionary script, trying thousands of common passwords per second. It was noisy, unsophisticated, and blatant. It was the digital equivalent of throwing a brick through a window. The system logs would show a blatant, external attack from a foreign IP aimed directly at the company's most public face. I watched the security dashboard out of the corner of my eye. For a terrifying 30 seconds, the original alert about my intrusion on the financial server remained. The hunt was still on. Then a new series of alerts began flashing, cascading down the screen, each one more urgent than the last. Critical. Multiple failed login attempts on A. Davenport's linked social media. Critical. Brute force attack detected. Source IP 185.191.171.42, Moscow, RU. Critical. Potential compromise of high-profile associate account. Initiating account lockdown. It was working. I could almost hear the frantic conversation in the cybersecurity office. On one hand, a single, quiet, anomalous ping on a financial server. It could be a glitch, a fluke, a ghost in the machine. On the other, a full-blown, active assault on the company's first lady, the socialite whose face was plastered all over their marketing. Which fire do you put out first? The one you can't see, or the one burning down the front porch? I imagined the frantic texts and calls to Liam and Amelia. Your wife's brand is under attack. We need to secure her online presence immediately. This is a targeted campaign against her. The original alert on the dashboard flickered. Then, it was recategorized. The priority flag was lowered from high to low. A note was added by an analyst. Possible server-side echo from social media attack vector, monitor. They had taken the bait. They dismissed my real surgical intrusion as a system glitch, a ripple effect from the bigger, louder, more dramatic fake attack. The hunters had abandoned the trail of the wolf to chase the gaudy scarecrow I had thrown in the field. I closed my connections one by one, my heart finally starting to beat again, a slow, heavy drum. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic groaning under my weight. The room was dark and silent again. I was safe. I was invisible again. Amelia's all-consuming, vapid, desperate need to be seen had just made me completely invisible. Her vanity had become my shield. And I smiled in the darkness. She had no idea how useful she was about to be. The air in the month that followed grew thin, charged with an unspoken static. The digital traps I had laid across Richard's network lay dormant, silent as spider silk, waiting for the fly to blunder in. I didn't have to force the issue. Hubris, as it always does, would do the work for me. The catalyst arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, heavy with the self-importance of its sender. Amelia's looping, ostentatious signature was embossed in gold foil on the back. Inside, the invitation was a monument to her ego. An evening of innovation and legacy, it proclaimed. A gala, of course. A massive, obscenely expensive party to announce Innovate Genetics' miraculous new gene therapy. The therapy built from my marrow, my cells, my pain. The venue was the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, a place of clean lines and quiet contemplation that she intended to desecrate with her blood-soaked triumph. The date was set. All their benefactors, their sycophantic partners, the jackals from the press, she was gathering them all in one place. She was constructing her own gallows and was now politely inviting me to witness the execution. I walked into the kitchen, where Amelia was directing the caterer for a pre-gala luncheon over the phone, her voice sharp and imperious. She was debating the merits of Caspian Sea Osetra caviar versus beluga. She didn't look up as I entered. I was just part of the furniture. I placed the opened invitation on the marble island in her line of sight. "I'll be attending," I said, my voice even. She glanced at the card, then at me, a flicker of surprise followed by faint amusement. "Of course, Freya. We'll need someone to assist with the coats." The dismissal was as automatic as breathing for her. She turned back to her phone call, having already forgotten my existence. No beluga. It's far too cliché." I held her gaze for a moment, though she didn't see it. In my mind, I saw the guest list, the names I had cross-referenced with Richard's files, the Athertons, the Vandermeers, the Chen Corporation. All of them would be there, sipping champagne, celebrating the science that had dissected my soul. They expected the silent parasitic maid to be there, a gray shadow in the corner of their glittering world. They had no idea I was the guest of honor, the star, the final act. The day of the gala, the house vibrated with a manic energy. Stylists and makeup artists descended like a flock of brightly colored, noisy birds. Amelia was a storm of demands, a queen preparing for her coronation. Liam paced the length of the living room, rehearsing his part of the speech, his face slick with nervous sweat. He was a man perpetually trying to fill his father's shoes, unaware they were filled with concrete. And then there was Leo. I found him in his room, hunched over his MacBook, the frantic clicking of the trackpad the only sound. His face was pale, his hair a mess. He was drowning. Amelia, in a stroke of what she probably considered efficient delegation, had tasked her 17-year-old son with managing the entire multimedia presentation for the event. A complex, multi-screen sequence controlled from a central hub. "Grandma," he groaned, looking up at me, his eyes wide with panic. "I'm going to ruin everything." I moved to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was thin, tense. "Breathe, Leo. What's wrong?" "It's this," he said, gesturing wildly at the screen. A tangled mess of files and timelines filled the display. "Amelia wants it to be perfect. Seamless. But the main video file, the big one, it keeps lagging. It stutters. If that happens tonight..." He trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. Amelia's wrath was a thing of legend. He pointed a trembling finger at a single large file. It was encrypted, of course. Everything in this family was locked away. The file was labeled Legacy, Cut, Final, .move, Legacy. The word was a branding iron, searing itself into my mind. I leaned in, feigning a gentle, grandmotherly curiosity. My heart was a cold, steady drum against my ribs. This was the moment, the hinge on which everything would swing. "That's a very large file. Perhaps the compression is bad. It can happen when the file is encrypted and decrypted so many times. It gets corrupted. Let me see." He was so desperate he didn't hesitate. He was just a boy, trying to please a mother who was impossible to please. "Do you think you can fix it? Mom will kill me." Literally. He was chattering, a nervous stream of consciousness about the lighting cues and the audio sync, his anxiety a perfect cover. I took the laptop. It felt heavy, a slab of metal and glass that held the key to my entire life. My fingers moved with a speed and certainty that would have shocked him. They were old hands, spotted with age, but they knew their way around a command line. It was a skill Richard had forced upon me, insisting his specimen be able to collate and manage his research data. He had inadvertently taught his lab rat how to dismantle the cage. 30 seconds, that's all it took. My own file, a digital bomb I had named Legacy True Final.mp4, was hidden on a tiny, innocuous flash drive I carried in my pocket. It was the same size, the same file type, cloaked to look identical to theirs. But its contents were not a slick corporate video. They were the truth. The entire, unvarnished, horrific archive of Project Chimera. Drag, drop, authenticate. The swap was instantaneous. Then, I ran a small, simple script I'd written, a cleaner that would clear the cache and reset the file's metadata, making it look like a fresh, optimized version. The progress bar filled. Complete. There, I said, handing the laptop back to him. My voice didn't shake. I think I fixed the compression issue. It should run smoothly now. The relief that washed over his face was so pure, so absolute, it was almost painful to watch. Grandma, you're a lifesaver. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He clicked on the file. The first frame of the corporate video, a soaring drone shot of the Golden Gate Bridge, appeared for a microsecond before he paused it, satisfied. He didn't check the rest. Why would he? His grandmother had fixed it. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his suit jacket. I have to get to the museum. I'll see you there. He gave me a quick, grateful hug and was gone, leaving me alone in the silence of his room. He had just armed the weapon that would obliterate his world, and he had thanked me for it. There was a hollow space in my chest where guilt should have been, but I felt nothing. Nothing but the cold, clear certainty of a surgeon about to make a necessary incision. Leo was collateral damage in a war that had been waged on my body before he was even born. He was part of the sickness, even if he was an innocent carrier. To save the future, the foundation of the present had to be demolished. All of it. The San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was a cathedral of white walls and soaring spaces. Tonight, it was filled with the low hum of money and power. Men in $1,000 suits and women draped in diamonds drifted through the galleries, their laughter echoing in the cavernous halls. The air smelled of expensive perfume and a faint, cloying sweetness from the towering floral arrangements. I wore a simple black dress. I was invisible, a shadow moving along the edges of the light. I took a glass of water from a passing waiter and found a spot in a darkened alcove with a clear view of the stage. People brushed past me without a second glance. The parasite. The maid. It was the perfect vantage point. From my position, I could see them all. The faces from Richard's donor list. There was Marcus Thorne, the venture capitalist, holding court by the bar, his face ruddy with champagne. Eleanor Vance, the pharmaceutical heiress, looking impossibly elegant, her family's foundation having funded Richard's earliest, most brutal experiments. They were all here, sipping cocktails, congratulating each other, completely unaware that they were standing in a digital execution chamber. Liam and Amelia worked the room, the perfect power couple. Liam, with his forced, sweaty smile. Amelia, radiant and predatory, her crimson dress a slash of color in the monochrome crowd. She moved with the confidence of a woman who believed she had won. Finally, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd as Amelia took the stage, bathed in a single, brilliant spotlight. She looked out at the sea of faces, a beatific smile on her lips. She was the picture of corporate triumph, of legacy secured. "Good evening," she began, her voice smooth and resonant, amplified through the hall's perfect acoustics. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate a pivotal moment, a moment born from a singular vision." She paused for dramatic effect. My late father-in-law, Richard Sterling, was a man ahead of his time. He had a vision not just for our family, but for all of humanity. A vision of a better future, free from the genetic lottery of disease and frailty. She gestured to Liam, who stood at the side of the stage, beaming with a pathetic reflected pride. "His work, his legacy, is the foundation upon which my husband and I have built Innovate Genetics. And tonight," her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "tonight, we unveil that legacy." She turned, a grand, sweeping gesture toward the enormous screen that dominated the wall behind her. In the control booth, I knew Leo was taking a deep, steadying breath, his finger hovering over the play button. "Behold," Amelia declared, her voice ringing with triumph, "the future of humanity." Leo pressed play. The screen flickered to life. For a single silent second, there was only black. And then, an image. Not the soaring drone shot of a San Francisco landmark. not a sleek, computer-generated double helix. It was a grainy, black-and-white photograph, stamped in the corner with a date from 1978. It showed a young woman, no older than 20, strapped to a cold, metal medical chair. Her arms were bound with leather restraints. Her head was held in place by a metal clamp. Her eyes, wide and terrified, stared directly into the camera lens. It was me. A sound rippled through the audience, a single, collective intake of breath, a gasp that was part confusion, part shock. On stage, Amelia's smile froze, a rictus of horror. Liam's face went slack, his jaw hanging open. Then, the image changed. A new slide. It was a page from a notebook, the handwriting sharp and clinical. Richard's handwriting. Diagrams of my cellular structure. Notes, scribbled in the margins. Specimen 0 shows remarkable resilience to cellular degradation. The sequence at locus 14Q exhibits unprecedented regenerative properties, proceeding with Phase 3 viral vector trials. Another slide, another page. Subjective report from Specimen 0 indicates extreme discomfort and psychological distress. Objectively, all biometrics are stable. Distress is an acceptable variable. A low murmur started to build in the room, a wave of unease. People were shifting in their seats, whispering to their neighbors. Marcus Thorne's ruddy face had gone pale. Eleanor Vance had a hand clapped over her mouth. Then came the final slide in the sequence. The screen was filled with a simple typed list under a stark, damning heading. Project Chimera, primary donors. The names scrolled by, slow, deliberate, each one a death sentence. The Atherton Family Trust, Thorne Ventures, the Vance Foundation, Chen Global Corporation. The list went on, name after name of the powerful, the philanthropic, the untouchable. Many of whom were sitting in the front 3 rows, their faces now masks of pure, unadulterated panic. They weren't just investors. They were co-conspirators. Their dark secret, the rotten foundation of their fortunes, was being projected 20 feet high for the entire world to see. The feed on the screen cut. The grainy photos and damning lists vanished, replaced by a clean, professional shot. It was me again. But not the frail old woman they saw lurking in the shadows of the Edgewood Drive house. Not the terrified girl in the photograph. I was seated in a simple chair against a plain, dark background. My hair was pulled back. My face was unadorned by makeup. My gaze was steady, aimed directly down the barrel of the camera lens, and my voice, when I spoke, was not the quiet, hesitant whisper of a servant. It was cold, clear, and absolute. My name is Freya Sterling. The frantic murmuring in the hall died instantly. Every eye was locked on the screen. But for 30 years, my husband, Richard Sterling, the man my daughter-in-law just called a visionary, knew me only as Specimen 0. I saw Amelia stagger back a step, her hand flying to her throat as if to stop a scream. Liam looked like he had been physically struck, his body swaying. My image on the screen never wavered. The legacy that Innovate Genetics is selling you tonight is not a product of genius. It is a product of torture. Project Chimera was not a scientific endeavor. It was a privately funded eugenics program designed to isolate what Richard believed was a superior genetic marker in his own family line, a marker he found in me. I laid it all bare. The forced experiments, the non-consensual tissue harvesting, the decades of meticulous, brutal data collection performed on my body while I was held as a prisoner in my own home, the lies that had been the bedrock of their entire lives. The vision for a better future Amelia spoke of was a future for a select few, built on the suffering of the unwilling. The miracle therapy they are offering you is based on a lie. It is based on my body, my pain, and my stolen biology. As I spoke, the screen split. On one side, my face remained, calm and resolute. On the other, a new window opened. It was a live data stream. Lines of code, the A, T, C, and G of my own life, began to scroll upwards at an incredible speed. Beneath the scrolling text, logos began to appear. The National Center for Biotechnology Information, the European Bioinformatics Institute, The DNA Databank of Japan, GenBank, every major open-source biological database on the planet. A line of text appeared at the bottom of the stream, stark and white against the black background. Uploading Freya Sterling Genome Complete Sequence. License, Creative Commons, Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike 4.0 International. The room was utterly silent now, a vacuum of shock. They understood. They all understood. My voice delivered the final blow. Their most valuable patent, the intellectual property worth billions, the very core of their company, is now worthless. It is public knowledge. It belongs to everyone, and therefore to no one. I leaned forward, just a fraction, my eyes burning through the screen and into the souls of every person in that room. You cannot own what has been made free. The screen split again. Tiny windows popped up in the corners, live feeds from social media, a Twitter feed, the hashtag #specimen0 exploding, a Twitch stream, the viewer count ticking upwards, passing 1 million, then 2, news banners from CNN, BBC, Reuters. The world was not just watching, it was converging. The video of my face faded, leaving only the data stream and the frantic counters. My final words echoed in the silence. The legacy is over. The screen went black. For a full 5 seconds, there was nothing. Absolute silence. Then, the chaos erupted. The shriek of a chair being knocked over. The first shouted question from a reporter. The frantic simultaneous ringing of 200 cell phones. It was the sound of a world breaking. The sound of a dynasty turning to dust. I watched Amelia crumble, her face a mask of disbelief, as she sank to the stage floor. I watched Liam, his face ashen, looking at the horrified faces of the donors as they scrambled for the exits, desperately calling their lawyers. I turned away from the stage. In the ensuing pandemonium, no one noticed the old woman in the simple black dress as she slipped out a side door and into the cool San Francisco night. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see but the ashes. The first sound was not a scream. It was the clear, crystalline sound of a single champagne flute shattering on the marble floor. A high, sharp note of percussion that cut through the expectant hush of the room. For one pristine, perfect second, that was the only sound. The auditory signature of a world breaking. Then came the deluge. It started as a single collective gasp, a wave of inhaled air, followed by a roar of human noise that felt physical, like a shockwave. I watched from the sliver of darkness in the service corridor, a ghost at the feast of my own making. The stage, which moments ago had been Amelia's throne, was now her pillory. The massive screen behind her was no longer a tool for her vanity, but a monument to her ruin. It cycled through the evidence, a relentless slideshow of damnation. My face, young and terrified, strapped to a laboratory chair. Richard's spidery clinical handwriting detailing the dosages and the results. And the names of the investors, the partners, the co-conspirators in Project Chimera, glowing in stark white against the black background. Many of those names were attached to faces in the front row, now contorted in masks of horror and fury. Amelia stood frozen. Her perfectly glossed lips were parted, but no sound emerged. Her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had dismissed me for a decade, were wide and blank, fixed on the screen. She looked like a marble statue of shock, beautiful and lifeless. The curated elegance she wore like armor had cracked, and through the fissures, pure, unadulterated terror was pouring out. Her hands, adorned with rings that cost more than the house I grew up in, were clutching the sides of the sleek, minimalist lectern, her knuckles white. She looked from the screen to the audience, and for the first time, she wasn't seeing a crowd of admirers. She was seeing a jury, a mob. Liam was not so stoic. He had been standing just to the side of the stage, beaming, the proud son about to inherit the kingdom. I watched his face drain of color as if a plug had been pulled at the base of his skull. His eyes darted from the screen to Amelia, to the furious faces in the front row. His mouth worked silently. He stumbled backward, colliding with a waiter's stand, sending a silver tray of canapes clattering to the floor. He didn't seem to notice. He staggered towards a large, ornate planter filled with pristine white orchids and vomited, his body convulsing with a violence that was startling. It was more than just revulsion. It was the physical exorcism of a lie he had lived his entire life. He was expelling the poison of his father's legacy, the very heritage he had been so proud of just minutes before. The chaos in the ballroom bloomed. Phones were out everywhere, not to post glamorous shots to Instagram, but to record the immolation. The flashes from cameras, once celebratory, were now like muzzle flashes in a war zone, capturing every angle of the collapse. The journalists, smelling the biggest story of their careers, surged forward, a pack of wolves sensing blood. Their questions were sharp, pointed projectiles. "Amelia, what is Project Chimera? Mr. Sterling, were you aware of your father's experiments? Is it true your company's patents are based on eugenics?" A portly man in the front row, whose family name had been one of the largest on the list of donors, was on his feet, his face purple with rage, screaming at the stage. "You implicated us! You ruined us!" His wife was trying to pull him back, her face a mess of streaming mascara. Another woman, a tech mogul I recognized from magazine covers, was already on her phone, her back to the stage, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Get a denial ready. Now, say we were defrauded. I don't care what you have to say. Just say it." Too late. The evidence was on 1,000 phones, already being uploaded, tweeted, shared, becoming a permanent, indestructible part of the digital ether. I remained in the shadows of the corridor. My heart was a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. My hands, which had trembled for so many years when serving them coffee, were perfectly still. There was no joy in this, no giddy rush of victory. There was only a profound, cold sense of finality. A grand, terrible equation had been solved, and the result was this beautiful, perfect destruction. I thought of Richard. He would have appreciated the clinical precision of it all. The systematic dismantling of reputations, the weaponization of information. But the idea that I, his docile specimen zero, the foundation upon which he built everything, had been the architect of its demolition. That would have been the one variable his arrogant mind could never have computed. I felt a faint vibration. My own phone. Not the house phone, not the phone they let me use to order their groceries, but my phone. A cheap, anonymous burner I'd bought with cash weeks ago. I pulled it from the pocket of my simple black dress. The rideshare app showed a gray sedan, 3 minutes away, waiting on a side street a block from the venue. My escape pod. I turned from the scene. I didn't need to see any more. I could already hear the distant rising wail of sirens. They weren't for me. They were for the kings and queens in that ballroom, whose crowns were now melting on their heads. I walked down the service corridor, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the concrete floor. Past stacks of linen, past catering carts, piled with the remains of a feast that would never be finished. I pushed open a heavy metal door marked Exit and stepped out into the night. The San Francisco air was cool and damp, thick with the familiar smell of the bay. The fog was rolling in, muffling the sounds of the city, swallowing the tops of the skyscrapers. The chaos from the gala was a muted roar behind me, a beast trapped in a cage. Here, in the quiet alley, it was peaceful. I walked towards the street, my steps measured and calm. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The inferno I had ignited was a self-sustaining reaction now. It would burn for a long, long time. I could feel the heat of the fire on my back, a strange and welcome warmth. The ride down the coast was silent. The driver, a young man with earbuds in, had glanced at me in the rearview mirror once when I got in, a flicker of curiosity at the sight of an old woman in a plain black dress getting into his car on a deserted side street in the middle of the night. But he said nothing. He turned up the volume on his music, a thumping, indistinct bass line, and focused on the road. I was grateful for the anonymity. I was just a fare, a destination programmed into a GPS. I watched the lights of San Francisco recede, the glowing grid of the city shrinking until it was just a smudge of light against the black velvet of the sky. We merged onto Highway 1, and the world outside the car dissolved into darkness, punctuated only by the sweep of our headlights across the winding asphalt. The Pacific Ocean was a vast, unseen presence to my right, a black void that breathed in long, slow sighs, the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. Each mile we covered felt like a line of code being deleted. Each curve in the road was a firewall being erected between me and the life I had just incinerated. I wasn't running from anything. I was driving toward myself. My new home is a small apartment in Carmel by the Sea. The realtor I'd communicated with through encrypted emails had left the key under a loose stone by the door, as instructed. I paid for 6 months' rent up front, a wire transfer from a layered account I had spent months setting up, a phantom identity born from Richard's own dark financial architecture. The money was a pittance, a rounding error in the vast sterling fortune, skimmed from a forgotten offshore holding company. Poetic justice. The apartment smells of salt, fog, and old wood. It is the opposite of the house on Edgewood Drive. There is no sterile gleam of polished chrome, no cold expanse of white marble. The floors are worn oak that creaks when I walk. The walls are a warm, creamy white, bare except for the way the shifting coastal light paints them in shades of gray and silver throughout the day. I have one chair, a simple wooden one. I have one table. And I have a large window that looks directly out onto the ocean. That is all I need. My gilded cage had 1,000 beautiful things in it, and my cell has only 3. But this cell, I chose. This cell has a view of the infinite. My days have found a new rhythm, one dictated by the tides and my own desires. I wake when the gulls start calling. I make coffee in a simple drip machine, the aroma filling my small space, a smell that is entirely my own. I take walks on the beach, the damp, packed sand cool beneath my bare feet. I watch the waves, the endless, churning, violent ballet of the Pacific. It is a mirror of the chaos I unleashed, but here, from this distance, it is beautiful, it is powerful, it is free. I feel a kinship with it. My connection to the world I left behind is a slim, black tablet. It is my scoreboard. The news is a firestorm. It's even bigger than I had anticipated. The Chimera Conspiracy is the headline on the front page of the New York Times. Eugenics, Greed, and the Fall of an American Dynasty screams a headline from the Wall Street Journal. Cable news channels run round-the-clock coverage. I watch panels of shell-shocked experts, ethicists, and lawyers try to dissect the sheer scale of the deception. They use words like monstrous, unprecedented, and a crime against humanity. I see footage of Liam, his face pale and haggard, being swarmed by reporters as he tries to leave a lawyer's office, his only response a mumbled, "No comment." I see a clip of Amelia's Instagram page, now a digital graveyard. The comments section on her last post, a smiling selfie from before the gala, is a torrent of vilification. She has been memed into a global symbol of entitled evil, #Sterling. Scandal and #SpecimenZero are trending worldwide. On TikTok, teenagers create skits reenacting Liam vomiting into the orchids. The destruction is not just financial or legal, it is cultural. We have been erased and rewritten as monsters, which, I suppose, is the truth. The dominoes are falling just as I planned. The powerful families whose names appeared on that screen are being dismantled. The CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, a primary investor in Project Chimera, has resigned. A state senator is facing a recall election and a federal investigation. Their empires, built on the quiet exploitation of my stolen biology, are crumbling into dust under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The logic bombs I planted in their corporate servers have been going off one by one, releasing incriminating emails and financial records to a network of investigative journalists I had anonymously contacted. It is a cascading failure, a contagion of truth. This afternoon, as the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light across the churning water, my new phone buzzed on the table. It was the first time it had made a sound since I bought it. A cheap, untraceable device I kept charged, just in case. My breath caught in my throat. For a fleeting second, the old fear returned. A cold dread that they had found me. That it was Liam, or Amelia's lawyers, or the authorities. I picked it up. A single message from an encrypted messaging app. The number was just a string of digits, but I knew who it belonged to. I had given Leo the secure app months ago, under the guise of wanting a private way for him to send me photos from school. The message wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a demand for an explanation. It wasn't a plea for help. It was only 7 words. I always knew you were more than a maid. Are you safe? I stared at the words on the screen. I always knew. He had seen me. All those years, when his parents had looked straight through me, Leo had seen me. Not as a servant, not as a piece of furniture, but as a person. A person with secrets. A person with strength. Something broke inside me. A dam that had held for 72 years, through Richard's cold cruelty, through Liam's callous neglect, through Amelia's vicious contempt. A single tear escaped my eye and traced a hot path down my wrinkled cheek. Then another, and another. I sat in my single wooden chair, in my small, empty room, and I wept. I wept for the young girl who was turned into an experiment. I wept for the woman who lost her life, her body, her very identity. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release. A great, shuddering catharsis that shook my entire body. I had destroyed my family to save myself. I had burned their world to the ground so that I could finally feel the sun on my face. And in the wreckage, the one person who mattered, the only one whose heart was pure, had reached out not with anger, but with love. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am free. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and looked out the window. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky was a bruised purple and orange. The waves crashed on the shore, a constant, soothing rhythm. I took a breath. A deep, full breath that filled my lungs completely, without the familiar constriction of fear or anxiety. It felt new. It felt like the first breath I had ever truly taken. My fingers, steady now, moved over the phone's keyboard. I am. I typed back. For the first time in my life, I can breathe. I hit send and placed the phone back on the table. I didn't know if I would ever see Leo again. I didn't know what my future held. But as I watched the last light fade from the sky and the ocean meld with the darkness, I knew I had done the right thing. I had chosen to live. I burned down my world to find my freedom, but the question still haunts me sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn. Was there another way? What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them.